Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey folks, welcome to episode 210 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy, here with Dave. We got D back there in the shadows producing. And our guest on the show is Ed Darack. He is a journalist who has worked on some pretty big stories, some pretty big book projects on Operation Red Wings, on the Extortion 17 crash, and more recently, a book about the Marines in Anbar province. So Ed, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a few years since we've spoken, and it's I haven't done this in a while, so it's nice to I'm a little rusty, I guess, but it's nice to be here, and it's always good to speak about some of the more interesting facets of recent American military history.
Real quick, we want to thank our sponsor, HelloFresh, for supporting the show. Go to hellofresh.com/teamhouse16 and use code teamhouse16 for 16 free meals.
So Ed, could you start off telling us a little bit about your background and sort of your entry into journalism and doing all this embedded reporting?
Okay, I'm not really a journalist. I've never been classically trained as one. I tell people, technically I'm a writer and an independent writer and a photographer. And I do a lot of things. I have a lot of interests, but journalism is one of the areas that I focused on, and it's pretty simple to me. You find a topic and you learn about it comprehensively, and you report on it. You create a media product. For me, it's been magazine articles, books, and a lot of times, photographs that go along with it. Because I really, I never worked for any media organization. I was always independent. So when I was in Afghanistan or Iraq, the organization was Ed Darack Photography. That was the organization. And then out of that came magazine articles, books, photographs, all sorts of stuff, that was distributed through Getty Images and Corbis, and not on their editorial side, they're on the creative side. So it was an interesting, had a very interesting, unique angle on everything. And then I would focus on, because I was my own business, my own deal, I was able to focus specifically on stories much longer than I could have had I worked for someone else. So I was unconstrained. And so then I, of course, had alliances for the book about Operation Red Wings and Operation Whalers. That book was published by Penguin, big publisher. For Extortion 17, that book was done through Smithsonian Books. I had a previous relationship with Smithsonian as a photographer for the magazine, and then a contributing editor, writer, and photographer for Air and Space. And then for the Anbar book, that was with Hachette Books, one of the big publishers. So I am a journalist. I do journalism. I tell people I do journalism, although I'm not a classically trained journalist. I just think it's simple. You just you learn about the topic as comprehensively as possible. Like you may not need to talk about a MAGTF, a Marine Air Ground Task Force, but you should know about it if you're writing about Marines. So it's stuff like that.
So Ed, growing up, did you want to be a photographer or a writer? What led you into this career path to begin with?
Yeah, I was fascinated with both writing and photography growing up, and geography, really. I'm a classically trained geographer. That was my degree from UC Davis. And I got into photography in high school, really, and that was to document climbing trips that I took. And then, I followed in the footsteps of some, outdoor photographers like Galen Rao specifically. And that just, I have a lot of interest in many different topics. So as a photographer, it was everything from combat to nature to flowers to energy to nuclear power plants. And then in terms of that, same with, photography was for military. It wasn't just specific to infantry or Marine Corps. It was aviation, and a lot of, different, their operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. And, the aviation piece, of course, led me to a lot of different topics, to include even aviation-based collections of intelligence. And that actually worked in critically with the Extortion 17 project. So it's just a lot of different topics that I've been interested in. And it's a blessing and a curse, because, you want to pursue all of them, right? Like I've written, articles about, about photographing a space shuttle launch, and then articles about unmanned aircraft systems, and then an article about the Cacho del Diablo mountain, geography articles. So it's all over the place, and it's just a vast area of interest. So I've sort of, I guess, attacked all these different specific ones, and you just do it. When you do it on your own, you can really commit a lot of time and resources to it. And I did that specific with Red Wings, with Extortion 17, and then with the book on Anbar province, because, I went there and I was with the Marines on the ground. So I think that's a long way around the barn, as a friend of mine would say, a very long-winded explanation. I have a lot of it. I like to explain things, and I like to learn about things and explain things in text primarily, but also with photographs to complement the text, and also maps too. I mean, part of my thing is making maps, although that's not something I talk about a whole lot. So it works.
So was the photography angle what got you interested in the embedded reporting overseas?
It's a really interesting story, because I come from a mountaineering background, and that was, I would take a camera along to photograph mountains as I was climbing, and up on like a Mount McKinley in Alaska and Mount Logan in Canada, some of the Sierra Peaks. And then, I'd always been interested in Afghanistan and always been interested in the military. And I got this opportunity to go to the Mountain Warfare Training Center outside of Bridgeport. They say Bridgeport, it's really closer to Colville and Walker, California, but it's really because they call it Bridgeport, California. And I did that in 2005, and I met up with the Marine Battalion there in March of 2005, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. And I went there. I was actually just, my media outlet for that was Gannett newspapers. They were interested in that, and I said, okay, I'll go. And I spent 2 weeks there, which is a long time, and I really liked it a lot. And they said, why don't you come with us to Afghanistan? And at this time, they were planning Operation Red Wings. And I thought, okay. And so I owned a house. I had a girlfriend who wanted to get married, and I had a dog, and I sold the house and got rid of the car, and my girlfriend got the dog, and I went back to MWTC in the summer, and I was there following the Mountain Leader course, and I learned about what it's like to do war, to undertake combat operations in the mountains in a training environment. And then I went to Afghanistan, and that's how it started with that. And it just kept going because it worked well. I integrated well with Marine combat units. And from there, it went to Iraq. It also went to aviation. I did an amazing embed in Iraq in 2007 with the 2nd Marine Air Wing Forward, where we actually integrated media ops with combat operations, which had never really been done before. We were dropping the ramp on a C-130 during combat operations when the jets would come to refuel, and photographing them. And we were actually augmenting the operation to accommodate that, which was totally insane, but they did it, and I did it, and it worked, so, but that's the entree point. It's sort of almost stream of consciousness, but a little bit more thoughtful. It's a little bit more.
As you're doing this sort of stuff, I mean, as with your background as a writer and everything, I mean, do you have a sense that like you're capturing history in the making, or is it more like I'm in the moment doing my job, and maybe in hindsight it really comes into a fuller picture, like, wow, that was a big thing that happened?
Both. I applied concepts and knowledge and techniques that I had honed as a, in the world of photography. I'm technically a rights managed stock photographer and a magazine photographer. And rights managed and royalty free. This is getting into the sticks a little bit, but really I wanted to create not just really beautiful, great images, but ones that were relevant and usable. So they weren't really photojournalistic. In terms of capturing the moment, it captured the moment, but I wanted to do it in a way that was just really beautiful. And that's odd to think about in terms of combat, or one of my topics that I really pursued was energy. Like I thought, wow, like an oil well pump jack at dawn is a really beautiful thing if you capture it just right. And those photographs ended up on covers of magazines and the New York Times, on the covers of books. And the photographs I took of war, instead of just being tossed into the dustbin, like, oh yeah, these are really great photojournalistic things, works, they were on lots of book covers. New York Times bestsellers, the book cover about Pat Tillman by John Krakauer, and that was my photo on the cover. And there was, just a lot of books, a lot of magazine covers, a Hallmark card even. So
a lot of people don't understand, just for the folks out there, Ed, that like there are people like you who take these pictures and go into like big photo libraries that you can subscribe to, like AP has one, Reuters has one, and then journalists, authors, whoever, if they pay for it, they can take that image off of the library and use it in their own journalistic or academic works or whatever it is. And I take it your work ended up in some of those libraries.
Yeah, but they weren't like the editorial ones. They were on the creative side. So that's the thing. So I ended up getting, instead of just having images, and this isn't just for military images, this is for a lot of different types of imagery. They ended up in ad campaigns and posters, a bunch of different things. It's just, I don't want to say they're better than the photojournalistic, the editorial stuff, but the creative side is just a little bit, I would never submit an image unless it was beautiful and balanced with light, a really well balanced image. And I remember thinking, okay, here I am, we're about to get shot at, and I'm like setting up a photograph, like not just recording it, I'm like moving myself around to get the guy's feet just right. There's a picture I have. It's Afghan fighter at dawn, and it was a silhouette, and his feet are right on top of Satal al-Sar, right exactly where that ambush happened. But I also, if my head was up about 3 more inches, he would have been visually chopped off, and which would have been a fine picture. But this way, you see the whole person. He's holding the AK over his shoulder, and the light's just reflecting just right off the rock. And then Brett Baylor's like, all right, we got to blow the cave now. And I'm like, hold on, because this is where Al Qaeda had attacked the base I was at before I got there with mortars, and they found the mortar plate and tube, and they just had a bunch of C4 and they're gonna blow it up. I'm like, hold on, let me get this photograph. Let me get the photograph. And like, come on. So it's interesting that you asked that, because it's almost like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Like, I'm supposed to be there and not interfering with something, but I am interfering because I'm setting up these shots. And I'm like, I'm never going to have this opportunity again. So let's do it. Just hold on. We can blow up the cave 30 seconds later, man. Right. Come on. So they blew the cave up, but that also was the case. I mentioned the photo shoot in Iraq. We called the Marine Air Wing. It was Air War in Iraq was the title for Smithsonian. And, a lot of times you'll see really cool air-to-air pictures where the ramp, you have an aircraft where you're not shooting through window, you're shooting out in space, like you're right there. The ramp is down. But to get a really authentic image, a lot of people don't realize this, but if you look at the bombs on a jet, if they have bombs and they've got 2 yellow stripes, that means they're live. And so all these photographs that I have, And we were doing the same thing. I mean, there's combat going on the ground. These guys have to refuel. We're augmenting the operations of the tanker. They actually gave me temporary secret clearance to like work in. It was really wild what we did. And nothing happened. Nothing was compromised on the ground, thank God. But these jets they would tank, and then we had like 30 seconds, and I would be yelling at the crew chief. He'd be yelling at the pilots. They would be talking to the jets, getting everything just right. It was the same type of thing. So it was photojournalism. I was documenting it, but I was also directing it a little bit, you know? So, I mean, I wasn't directing the combat, but just how the jets were. I was like, okay, we need you guys to break outside, like right now, go. And so, and it was, so they're, again, kind of patting myself on the back. I don't want to come off as that, but they're beautiful images. They're in war zones during war. It's real. You know, we're not over the Mojave Desert to say, okay, let's do this again. But, you know, that's, again, a long way around the barn to answer the question. I was documenting it, but they're timeless, you know, because they're good images.
How are the military, or how is the military, you know, the personnel, when you're trying to line up those shots? Are they generally patient with you? Are they like, fuck off, like we're doing this thing?
Yeah, well, it's the Marine Corps, man. And I love the Marine Corps. I have no qualms saying that, you know. This is me not being a journalist, you know, like, you know, you're supposed to be objective. I love the Marine Corps. I've had some amazing times with the Marines. And, you know, a general, the Air Wing general for that shoot, it was my idea. I was 6 weeks on the ground with an infantry unit, and that was rough up in Haditha. And I got back, and I was, you know, like, you know, I met up with the PAO guys, awesome group, awesome couple of guys. And I said, "Okay, can I go up in a C-130 and you know, get some shots?" And so I did. And then I thought, God, this would be great, you know, to do an embed with an air wing, because the embeds always go over the ground. And they're like, well, why don't we talk to the MAG CEO and the general? The MAG is a Marine Air Group. So the next thing you know, we had this thing lined up, this project lined up. Smithsonian okayed it. And a couple of weeks later, I was back in Iraq. I was like, I'm never coming back to Iraq. I'm out of here. And then I'm coming back. And this time, instead of being on the ground, and it was interesting because I got the photograph. I asked the pilots, hey, can we go to this one bridge and this one area? I get the photograph from the air. You know, there's some personal reasons of, you know, one of the Marines I was friends with had been killed by an IED. And so I was able to get, you know, well, I don't want to get too into it, but for the family, I thought they would want to see, you know, where this was and photograph that spot from the ground and from the air. But, you know, we did it. And for the most part, the pilots were into it. They liked it. And for the most part on the ground in combat, I knew my limits. You know, you're in combat, so you can get killed, right? So you can't do stupid things. But I did some stupid things like, all right, I'm going to go out in front of you guys. Like, you guys are patrolling, and this is like the lead patrol, and I'm going to go in front of you. All right? Okay. Fine. Don't get killed, you know, don't get shot, you know. So it's don't step on an IED. But that's it. Just you know, it just sort of it's the moment. You have to be hyper aware, I think, to make sure that there's so many things going on. It's so dynamic, and you know, I love that. I thrive on it. I think you guys get that, because I was never, you know, shoot, move, and communicate. I was photograph, move, and communicate. You know, it was and not get in the way of the shooters, movers, and communicators, and not problematic. And you know, and the other thing too is, I mean, you're with Americans at war, so if they needed some mortar rounds to be carried, or I think we're far enough away from when all this happened. No one's going to, oh, you violated the Geneva Convention. You know, I mean, I carried that stuff. You know, I'm not going to say I was part of the unit, but, you know, I was embedded with them. And, you know, and then at night when there's stuff, you know, people are on post or sleeping, and I'm like, we got a bunch of steaks here that are going bad. Let's cook them and eat them. You know, no one's doing it because they're all exhausted. So I did it. Yeah. You know, stuff like that helps, you know, not to say I'm going to do this to help myself, but you just do it. Right. Yeah. You know, that's just, you're kind of there like, oh, everybody's maxed out on their combat loads. I'm not, okay, I don't have a combat load. Well, you do now. Here, take the
Here's the base plate.
Yeah, well, I never carried a base plate or a tube, but I carried the rounds, so yeah.
So,
that,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I just want to make sure I answer your question. I go off on all these angles.
Yeah.
No, it's great. We just need to take a second to give a shout out to our sponsor, HelloFresh. Flavor is in full bloom at HelloFresh. Enjoy the taste of spring with chef-crafted recipes featuring ripe seasonal ingredients delivered right to your door. When the spring sunshine is calling your name, don't call for takeout because takeout is expensive and fattening. Get HelloFresh instead. Go to HelloFresh.com/TMouse16 and use code TMouse16 for 16 free meals. So HelloFresh is a great idea. It's a great company. They deliver the ingredients and the recipes to fresh meals right to your door.
We have a box they sent us right over here that we're going to divvy up. And yeah, you open it up, there's recipes, and then inside it's the meals are in like separate packages. And so you have all the ingredients and the recipe and everything.
Saves you the hassle going to the store. It's really well priced. I mean, it's what were you going to say, Ed?
I was going to say I want to get it.
Yeah.
No one told me to say that, but I'm getting hungry.
No,
it sounds good.
Yeah, they're great plans, because it's not, you don't have to go to the shopping, buy all the groceries, do all that. Like the meals come straight to you and you cook them up so they're good and fresh when you get them. So check out HelloFresh.com/TMouse16 and use code TMouse16 for 16 free meals.
And real quick, I'd also like to remind everyone out there to consider subscribing to our Patreon. There's a link down in the description. And it starts just $5 a month, and you get access to all of these episodes ad-free. So really appreciate you guys out there who help support the show. So, Ed, back to you. Why don't we start or get into a little bit here about your sort of entryway into Operation Red Wings? When did that come up on your radar? When did it become a story for you that you started covering?
Well, like I said, I was at Mount Warfare Training Center in March of 2005, and that was right around the time, I was with the Marine Battalion. They were getting ready to go over there, do what they call the RIPTOA, Relief in Place Transfer of Authority. Their ADVON, Advanced Echelon, which is, now we're going to get into the fun stuff like the initialisms, the portmanteaus, and the acronyms of the DoD, Advanced Echelon, all this stuff. But yeah, it hadn't happened yet. At that point, it was still called Operation STARS. 3-3, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, the sister battalion of 2-3, the ones that I met in MWTC and then embedded with in September and October of 2005 after it happened. They had been planning it, but they were feeding all the information back to the battalion. And so they were getting ready to, jump in and just take off running as, they wanted to keep the operational tempo as they had established it, as 3-3 had established it, which was one battalion level operation per month. And it wasn't really that kinetic. It was mostly focused on a lot of coin, a lot of counterinsurgency. And, they knew about this guy, Ahmad Shah. He had popped up on their radar. And I do have some very interesting information about him, too, that I discovered that I haven't published. I'll mention that later. Sure. So then I spent the summer up in the mountains with the Marines. I don't want to say I was training with them, but I was covering them training what's called the Mountain Leader course. Very, very difficult course, 6-week course. So I followed along with them, and then sold my house, all that kind of stuff, and went over to Afghanistan and met up with the Marines. And I went out to a base called Camp Blessing, which was really way out there. And it was, some people say, well, you're not lucky to go out there, but I was very fortunate because that was only 7 miles from where all this had happened. And the Marines who were there were experts in that terrain. The platoon that was there was Echo 1, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, Echo Company, 1st Platoon. I'm saying that out of order, but that's Echo 1. And it was Pat Kinzer, who's now a really good friend of mine. He was the platoon commander. And so I was embedded with his platoon. And, I learned all, at the time, I was like, well, I'm going to write, photographing you guys, photographing the situation. And I want to write a book about your experiences. And I eventually did that. And the focus was Red Wings and then Whalers. The book that I wrote, Victory Point, I laid everything out about Red Wings, all the basic, there's some stuff that I learned after the fact that would have supplemented that. I can get into some of that here. But that book was not specific to Red Wings. It was included in Red Wings, and the big victory was Whalers, and they were going after the same guys, and they ran them out of town, so to speak, and they were never able to reestablish what they, any type of disruption of coalition forces or government of Afghanistan initiatives. Like, they got the elections in September, so that's how that went. But that's what got me. That's what I just going out there and being on the ground. There's nothing like with the Marine Corps, and and I've embedded with other units. Some really wonderful units throughout the entire Department of Defense. It just doesn't. You can't do it by phone. You can't just call these people up and say, "Oh, I want to write a book about Red Wings." And being there on the ground with them, the people who were up and down those valleys during that period of time, during Red Wings, during Operation Whalers, getting shot at, shooting back, doing calls for fire, doing all that stuff, medevac, and then seeing it myself, like, seeing an actual, 9-line being delivered by a joint terminal, actually a FAC, Joint Terminal Attack Controller in the Marine Corps, who's a pilot, they just call a FAC, Forward Air Controller. But, and it was that I like I was talking about earlier, you may not need to know, like what I just said, the difference between a JTAC and a FAC. Most people couldn't tell you that. But I know about it because I was there and I learned about it. And it's important to learn about all these, what some people might say is minutia, but what I think of as granules into a very strong foundation, because then you don't do things like say, oh, the soldiers from the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Marine Regiment, like they're Marines, they're not soldiers. And similarly, you don't say a pilot is a grunt, it's just not, there's just certain things, and just that knowledge and just the demonstration of having taken the time to learn about the history, about the operations. Like if I went up to, I guess, Joint Base Lewis McChord, that's where 75th is based. Is that correct?
The 2nd Ranger Battalion is based out there.
Okay. If I went up there, I would just say, I know nothing. I'm going to learn about, because I don't know anything about the Rangers, and that's what I do. The first thing, if I go into a situation, I'm not going to be Mr. Ego guy and say, oh, I've written these books. It's like, okay, I know nothing. And I want to learn, and I want to learn from the people who do it, the practitioners. And then you learn, and then do you get a lot of information, and the doors open, and you end up being able to create a really good, solid work. And again, I'm patting myself on the back right now, but to this day, and a lot of people have tried, let me tell you, I should show you some of the emails, people that did not like, by far, the vast majority of people love the book, but there's people who didn't like me explaining that there were not 400 Taliban, it was 7 or 8 guys, and where does that come from? It comes from, being there, looking very closely at all the information that I was given. And to this day, no one's poked a hole in that book. I can point out some errors that I made, but in terms of the overall big picture of Red Wings and certainly of Whalers, it's stood the test of time. And I've seen a lot of other authors come in, and it seems like it's a cottage industry. Red Wings, writing about Red Wings is a cottage industry. It's almost like a rite of passage. It's like, oh yeah, I've written an article on Operation Red Wings, or there's people out there, and this is funny. They actually would go to a website that I made to promote the book that was very comprehensive, and then maybe they would call me up or email me, and then they would write an article about my article, and then they would publish that, and then somebody would somebody else would cite that. And so now they don't have to cite me. Oh yeah, I wrote this article. And so they're an expert. I mean, This has happened a lot. I'm sure it's happened to you. You know, it's really funny. It's really funny. And it's happened in not specific to Red Wings, but I wrote an article. It's called Welcome to Yodaville. So back in the late 80s, a guy named Floyd Usery, call sign Yoda, a Whiskey Cobra pilot based out of MCAS Yuma, conceptualized having an urban target complex out in the desert. And now they have, it's called Range 2301R UTC, Urban Target Complex. And they dragged a bunch of Connex boxes and they stacked them 4 high. And they did this earlier on, like in, I don't know, maybe 2000. I said it wasn't the late 80s, late 90s. He thought about that, but it's called Yodaville, right? And so I wrote an article about it. And a couple of years after that, some blog picked up on it. And then the Daily Mail wrote an article about my article. They didn't even go and do it themselves. They just wrote the article. And then of course they didn't get they said, oh, it's the Air Force. No, it's the Marine Corps, soldiers. Well, yeah, there's no soldiers in the Air Force.
Yeah, the Daily Mail's done that to me a few times, and everything in it's wrong. The pictures are wrong, everything's messed up.
Yeah, but I guess to get to this is sort of demonstrating if you take the time and you do actual real research, which is dangerous when you're writing about war. It's dangerous to do real research because you have to be shot at and risk getting blown up, right? And so you can't do it by phone. And you have to go there and do it. And not only can you go out there and be a sort of battlefield tourist and be like, yeah, I'm out here with the Marines, it's awesome. You have to do the background work, which is academic type stuff. You have to understand that, for instance, on a PEC 16 or, there's a million different ones, that's not a laser designator, that's a laser pointer, that's a sparkle. The jets have a targeting pod as a designator. How does that work? How does that work to build situational awareness? What is that? What's the kill chain? How does that function from a guy on the ground with a PEC 16 pointing at something, doing a talk on with a JTAG? It goes on and on. You have to learn all that. And a lot of this stuff that I just, sort of touched on now, it doesn't, you're not going to maybe put that in a book, but the fact that you know it and you've been in that and you've had that foundation, that granularized foundation that I talked about built up, that's real journalism to me, right? And nobody taught that to me.
Yeah.
And journalist classes have actually had me come in and they'll ask me tell us, and I'll tell them that. And it's not a very realistic way to go about things because it's so expensive. And I'll fund it. I funded it. Okay, I'll do it. I'll fund it. Not a problem. And in the long run, from a business standpoint, we're not here to talk about business. It paid off, but it's still, you really have to believe in what you're doing, and you really have to. And of course, down the line, you can take those lessons and apply them to other things. And I do that to this day. I mean, some of the other work that I'm doing, you really want to found everything. You really want to have a solid foundation. And with the military, it's not just guys crushing plates, as you know, and going out and killing bad guys and stacking bodies. It is an immensely complex world that the Department of Defense has. I mean, it keeps getting better. It keeps getting more refined. But wow, is it an amazing? It is, from the now they call it C5 ISTAR. They've added cyber to that mix. The strategic backbone, the C5 ISTAR backbone, that all the way down to the operational level, and then down to the tactical level, and how all that functions and how it fluidly works together. To learn about that stuff, it does not take. It takes years. Yeah, it takes years.
So tell us about Operation Red Wings and what your findings were. What really happened that day, based on your research?
Well, so when I wrote the book, I had some after action reports. The book came out in April 9th or 10th, 2009, and then the soft cover came out a year later. And I interviewed a lot of people. I tried to get in touch with Naval Special Warfare, and this was before Lone Survivor came out. And I just got stonewalled, and I thought, okay, that's fine. the focus is really, it isn't just Red Wings. It's just this progression. It started with 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, and Operation Mavericks and Operation Celtics, and those guys were up there in the Korengal Valley in the winter time, getting inserted, doing ramp down inserts. Like, there's some great pictures that I don't know if they're still around. This is almost 20 years ago now, of these Marines running out the back ramp of a CH-47, and it's just basically hovering there. And these guys are getting out, and they're staying up there. I want to give 3-3 their due. And they were up there for not months, but weeks on end in caves, and like in February. So I take it from that and I move it through to the pre-deployment training. And then, we go to, Red Wings, and then Operation Whalers, which is, the ultimate victory. But the information came from the Marine Corps, and then from after actions that some, Naval Special Warfare AR, summary of actions, let's just call it material that I was able to source. And, it was straightforward. They got ambushed. And, when you're in the mountains and you get interlocking fires from a superior position with PK. I've actually experienced that. I can say, I've been shot at and one valley over during Operation Pill when I was with the Marines. And I tell you what, it's an effective way to ambush people. And they use me as an aiming point, because I'll admit this, big dummy, no body armor, Nikon F6 with a flash to do fill flash, out there doing fill flash. And then the next thing you know, explain to people, it's like over 6 inches, it's whizzing, under 6 inches, it's snapping. And then you start hearing that, and then the muzzle, and I was like, oh boy. And so, I got to experience what that was like, getting shot at with a PKM, and, and not getting mortared, and not RPGs coming down. And that's what these guys had. It doesn't take 400 guys, as you know. It just takes a few guys on superior terrain, just, general aim point. And the specifics of who made the phone call and this and that and who was in this spot didn't really matter to me when I was writing the book. It was just, they got inserted, they got tracked, it was find, fix, F2, find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. The enemy ran through the kill chain, right? They found them, they fixed them, tracked them, targeted them, F2, T2, E3, right?
Find,
kill
fix,
chain.
finish.
Yeah, well, okay, that's an abbreviated version. The one that I know is find, fix, track, target, engage, assess, F2, T2, EA. Yeah, so that's what they did. They ran through it. And Nicholas Moore's book does a great job, and amazing job. I love that book. He's great, and he summarized it very well. They found the fast rope, right? They had to jettison it. If you interview who I was talking about before, you can get into that. I have great detail, about why they did that. Their imagery wasn't that, they misinterpreted the imagery, and they didn't bring along enough fast ropes. They had to drop in below the treetops, and it got snagged, and then they had to jettison it, and they got out of there. And so then that's, but it wasn't just that gave them, that tipped them off, that allowed them to find and fix on them. But that was one, the footprints and everything. And of course, the helicopter, Chinook is kind of loud. But anyway, so I covered that, and I think I did a very good job of it. And, to this point, I didn't get into the specifics of the Navy SEAL planning. And I learned about that later, and I can explain some of that. That's never been published before.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
So, well, we want to do it right now?
Sure.
I can.
Whichever.
Okay, so,
yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I'm not going to talk about. I'll just say that the parents of one of the Navy SEALs got in touch with me. Wonderful people. They felt that the Navy side of the story. They felt that, I'm not saying this is how it is. They felt that this person, this SEAL who had been killed, his actions weren't portrayed accurately in the book Lone Survivor or the movie Lone Survivor. And so that opened up a lot of interesting possibility, a lot of interesting interviews. I worked on a project with a wonderful journalist, a real journalist, somebody who's been classically trained and who is great, Ross Schneiderman. We ended up not publishing this. It was for a very large publication, and we ended up not publishing it. But we were contracted, paid, but they didn't publish it because the portion of the publication shut down, and that's fine. But anyway, I got to interview a lot of the SEALs who were involved in this, who weren't killed. And probably the biggest thing that I learned was, I'll tell this in a second, one of the big questions was, why did they send in basically a fire team? Mm-hmm. Like in the Marine Corps, it's like a fire team is 3 Marines plus the fire team leader, 4 guys. 4 of those plus the squad leader's a squad. I mean, you would never go into a situation like that. You would have to be a really good squad to go in as a 13-man group. And they went in as a fire team. And a lot of people were always wondering, like, why did they do that? And what was the point? And why did they make that planning decision? Well, as it turns out, they had planned to send in essentially a squad. They wanted 3 groups of 4 guys dispersed through the mountain. And had they had that we wouldn't be talking right now. It would have been just another unknown combat operation. That decision was made, and it was approved by the SOTF. That specific decision, I don't believe, would have been approved by the SOTF, but the CONOP, right? And I don't have direct experience with concepts of operations and approval processes with higher. You do, I assume, and how that works. But when you're applying, when you're applying like the 160th and all these other different capabilities and assets, it needs to be signed off by CJ SOTF Alpha at the time, full bird colonel, I think, or maybe a 1-star. I can't remember. But so that was the big, you want to talk about that? Like,
yeah, why end up going with 4 instead of 3 separate teams?
Well, that's a $64,000 question, Jack. It's just like, I think, this is my opinion and my just guessing, they either didn't have the manpower or other SOF units didn't want to work with them and provide that. Those are those 2 options. The third option is they really thought that that was a viable option, and that going as a bigger operational footprint, because as you know, in those mountains are, the hills have eyes there, right? Mm-hmm. It's very, every person that you add on to a unit that's moving in that terrain, it really, it's not an exponential increase of signature, like, okay, you're like the sniper team that would go through there. A sniper team, I think, was typically, I think it was 4 guys. I don't know the table of organization of a Marine scout sniper team. I probably should know that. I think it's around 4 guys: shooter, spotter, corpsman, saw gunner. Does that sound right? Yeah.
A sniper spotter team for sure, but it makes sense that as the war went on, they augmented that and went in a little heavier than normal.
When the sniper team, who was going to do this originally, they had planned it with 6 guys. Mm-hmm. So shooter, spotter, corpsman, saw gunner, 60 millimeter mortarman, and I think I want to. This is me making this up. Probably a 240 gunner. I kind of don't think so. That's too heavy of a gun. But I think it was definitely 6 guys, and those are extraordinarily knowledgeable, skilled. They were there. They have been operating in that terrain for months. They knew it very well. They weren't just like, hey, we just got over here from, Dam Neck, Virginia, or Coronado. They had been there for months. And so and they also weren't going to get, I'm kind of jumbling this up a little bit. The original plan the Marines had, they were going to have this 6-man team for the R&S portion for phase 0 shaping. walk in from water pour.
Yeah.
So it's not jump in a very noisy helicopter, you know. And you know, the 160th, those guys are great. You know, like all Army aviation, they're wonderful. They're very, very professional, and you know, they're amazing pilots. You can be as amazing as you can be. You're not going to like fly in a certain way that masks the sound. I mean, you can fly tactically, and you can sort of mask that sound a little bit, but you know, you're not being tactical at all by opening an operation with a Chinook when you're within a mile of population that has been known to be allied with the enemy. I mean, that's just not. So, you know, I'm not going to get. I don't know. I don't have visibility on had they thought about walking in. I don't know about that, but had they put, you know, basically a squad and not a fire team on the ground, yeah, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because they would have had, you know, fire support. You know, even if it was like just, you know, direct fire support with 5.56, or, you know, I don't know what SEALs carry with them. I don't know. I don't know if they carry back then. They carry mortars or whatever. But I mean, like one 60 millimeter mortar that will wake someone up and be like, all right, we're done. No more ambush. You know, 60 millimeter mortar is like, you know, a firecracker compared to a 120 or a 105 artillery. But still, it's like, okay, these guys are shooting back at us. We're done. We're out of here. They would have broke contact and ticked over, right? So, but that was probably like the biggest thing for me, because I was mostly, a lot of people are interested in like, you know, who made the phone call, you know, who's the, you know, Medal of Honor and all this kind of stuff. And I don't care about any of that. I mean, it's just, you know, it's not, you know, I'm much more almost clinical about it. Like, I was interested in, how did the ambush take place? What set the stage for it? You know, what was the table of our organization for this specific operation, and how did it evolve? What was the intel? Who are the people involved with this? You know, what were the fire support plans? You know, those are other things that were I can tell you for sure were overlooked. Fire support, like, you know, that's, you can't go outside the wire without a fire support plan. You know?
And in your research, that part was overlooked.
Oh, absolutely. The OPSO operations officer for 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines is. I actually just talked to him a couple nights ago. His name's in the book, so I'll use his name. Tom Wood, Major Wood, and he, you know, he briefed Eric Christensen. He said, we have 12 grids for you. I don't know if they're specifically target reference points, TRPs, but they had registered grids on that mountain, and they were like, do a call for fire. And during Whalers, there was an ambush that was essentially identical to that ambush of the snipers I was talking about. The corpsman got shot in the knee, Jamie Pigman. And what ended it was the call for fire of the doghouse, I think. That's probably a standard Army call sign for artillery doghouse, but it was in Asadabad, and they had 105s with rocket assisted projectiles, so it barely ranged to that grid, but they did it, and they broke contact, you know, and that was it.
End of that fight.
It
Yeah.
doesn't really need a 105. I mean, it had been, you know, it could have been, you know, 81 millimeter mortar or something. But that's the thing. I mean, my integrating that into this conversation comes from spending so much time with Marines who are just, you know, combined arms, multi-domain, tactical and operational combined arms campaign frameworks they just wake up in the middle of the night talking about it. You know, that's what they do.
Do you feel
sure the range?
Sorry about that. I was going to ask you, do you feel as though the SEALs' lack of combined arms experience and lack of, you know, the SEALs are more of a raid force than an on the ground sort of, you know, movement to contact sort of out there.
Right.
Do you feel like it was those two factors, one, terrain familiarity or area familiarity, and then not being used to working in a combined arms environment, that those two factors heavily influenced it?
I don't know enough about the Navy SEALs. I know that they do a lot of different things, and there's some, I have some friends who are in that world. I know some of the family members. I mean, they're wonderful, great Americans. They're wonderful people. And I know some specifics about operations in which they were involved, but I don't even really want to discuss, like, I could probably talk about the 75th Rangers, but I've never been on the ground with Rangers, and so I won't even talk about, their fundamental fighting ethosi or whatever the is. I just don't know.
Sure.
I do know about the Marine Corps. I'm not an expert. Only Marines are experts in that. I'm not. I'm knowledgeable about it, and I tell you what, it is beat into them. Like, you have a fire support plan, period. Like, you don't go outside the wire without not just a fire support plan, but contingent fire support plans. Like, what happens if it's cloudy and we can't get bore on station? Okay, what happens if Slasher has to go back, for whatever reason, and it's constant red selling with those guys. It kind of almost makes you go insane, but that's how they fight, and so you've got 2-3 2nd Battalion 3rd Marines and their operations guy, who I will tell you, he's a friend of mine. He is a Marine. He's retired now, retired as a full bird, but he is a really good Marine MAGTF planner. That guy knows his stuff, and this is 20 years ago. He knew it then, and he delivered everything to them, and they didn't use it. There were no call for fires at all.
So as far as actions on the ground and in the air and back at the TOC, I mean, when the word goes up that this ambush has taken place, that we have troops in contact out there, can you kind of, like, again, walk us through, your research and what you uncovered as far as, like, how this thing progressed?
Well, that's I've learned a lot about it since I wrote the book. Some very specific details. I haven't looked at that in a while. I want to be careful about what I say. The summary is that there was confusion, as there often is. And, it's like, sometimes they'll say, hey, how come they say alpha and not A? I say, well, because communication, even when you say, like, spell my name, Ed, it's not ED, it's Echo Delta. Even when you say that, people, they mess it up. There was that going on. There was confusion because there were multiple tactical operation centers. There was one at Bagram, and then there was one at Jalalabad, and those guys were on. I assume most of the viewers here know what MERC is. It's Military Internet Relay Chat. We'll call it MERC Chat, which is sort of redundant. It's just MERC. And there was chat. There was a lot of traffic on that, and there was communication over a PRC 148 multi-band intra tactical imbiter, tactical radio, 5-watt radio, and then there was some phone calls, but the communication just fell out. I mean, when you look at military, when things go bad with military operations, it's so often little details like that, communication. Like, it's even on a day-to-day thing. Like, I was, my name gets misspelled, and it's like, okay, well, we're not getting shot. I'm not getting shot at right now. It's fine. You can misspell my name, but you miss something. You're like, one number on a grid. If it's like the 3rd grid on a 10-digit grid, that's like, you're not even going to hear it. I mean, it's like 1,000 meters away, right? I mean, it's off by that much. So, to answer your question, in general, the communication, this whole thing really comes down to a breakdown in C3, command, control, and communication. The 3rd C is often set off on its own, but usually you hear communication in C2. but it was the C3. That was another thing. So I think one of the Marines have their, I'm talking about Marines because that's what I know the most. Before they go outside the wire, they got their comm plan, they got their fire support plan, they got their medevac plan. Help me. What else do you have when you go outside the wire?
Coordinations with adjacent units.
Yeah, battle space deconfliction. Yeah.
Right. So that's, and it's just like, when you're, I talk about like in a really well-run system, be it military or not. We'll talk about military, like, or pilots. Like when you hear these pilots, like they'll run through things like, okay, this is turned on, that's turned on, and they have to take a good pilot. Will not just go, okay, A, B, C, D, and E, check. We'll really look, okay, is A turned on? B, yes. Even if it's mundane and silly, not silly, none of it's silly. Even if it seems like it's just mundane and run of the mill, it's not, because something's going to go wrong. And if didn't you check B? Oh, well, I thought I did. I just flipped it. Okay, you didn't check it, right? So that's the thing before going outside the wire, before doing any of this stuff. And that's sort of a general kind of I guess almost like a slot. I don't want to call these guys sloppy, but you have to, my observations of military operations, from small squad level to battalion level, it's just really extreme detail oriented. You have to be, right?
Yeah.
Every little thing.
No, it's spot on. But as far as the way events transpired the rest of that day, Turbine 3-3 gets spun up.
Right. Okay. I'll get into that. So there was a long delay. Again, I've been really busy with some other projects, and I told myself about this time yesterday, go back and read through these books because you're going to get asked questions. Did I do that? No. So we'll see how good my memory is. There was it was a long delay because of people just didn't know what was going on. And this is actually, again, I can't get into specifics, but this delay has been recorded. People there's confusion. They're like, well, who's this? Okay. Oh, wait, is that Bagram or is that Jalalabad? Who's, Mako? Who's that? Okay. And then there's people, again, like talking about little tiny things like this happened. A guy had to go to the bathroom, right? So, and then someone had to watch over, but he didn't know maybe some of the specifics. And then that guy came back, and crazy little things like that aren't crazy at all. They're just details that need to always be paid, hawkishly looked at and watched over. And so I think it was about 4 hours before they spun those aircraft up. And then at that time, and we're going to get into some weather, there was if you look at the I guess it's the Asian monsoon, that moisture that gets pushed up into that area, that is on the northwestern periphery of the influence of that. They do get thunderstorms in that area. Not a lot, it's not crazy, but they get them there at that time of year. And that is a huge factor in, weather, I call it ESA, environmental situational awareness. I don't know if the military calls it that. That's my term. Maybe I made it up, maybe not. Maybe somebody made it up before I did. But that they went in and they, at first it was, there was clouds coming up and there was some obscuration and there was some issues with that. And then the aircraft got shot down and then they went back in to look for it. But that monsoon had been there. They had to, that's something for the pilot. I know about this a bit. I'll tell you a little bit, but there almost was another disaster, a midair disaster, because there were 5 ships in the air going through pea soup, and they said we can't do this, and they had their plan of basically their egress plan, which was everybody go this. I'm going to go this way. I'm going to go that way. We can't see anything. We'll just do it. So that averted. I mean, can you imagine had they even 10 more seconds heading inbound, and there could have been another disaster, but they had to break off because of the environment. It was too late. It was thunderstorms were closing in. raining, everything. So yeah, you had the insert on the night of the 27th, movement, some of the movement, the sound alerted the guys, Ahmad Shah's guys. So in the morning, maybe even at night, they were picking up their trail. They got identified, they got ambushed. There was just a long period of confusion. There wasn't very good, communication to begin with. And once people knew, okay, something's wrong, we have to send in a QRF or IRF, immediate reaction force, depending on what branch of the military you're talking to is, predicates that terminology, but they're the same thing, send in people that save them. And so then they finally got that spun up, they got shot down, and then they tried to go back, they couldn't, and then they moved in forces on the ground, and that's when the big search began. So, and then of course, Luttrell got saved by Mohammed Gulab and Shana, and they recovered the bodies up on Sital Sar. So, did I answer your question adequately?
I think you walked us through some of the main key events there, but I am really interested to hear what your findings were. What were the big takeaways that came out of this experience? Research that you did for the book or subsequently afterwards, that maybe are important or that people haven't heard before.
Okay, well, this is going to get a little technical.
Yeah, go for it.
You go back to really the modern military. It started with the Goldwaters-Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act of 1986. Mm-hmm. And, prior to that, you had service chiefs who were commanding on the ground, right? So now we have COCOMs, combatant commanders. So, each branch of the military they're tasked with organizing, training, and equipping. They're not leading on the ground. So the Commandant of the Marine Corps, he organizes, trains, and equips the Marines under him. And maybe another 4-star will be at CENTCOM or SOUTHCOM or EUCOM or whatever. But, the actual duty of the service is to organize, train, and equip. So you started to get this, that really came from the Holloway Commission, the Holloway Report, which was that came after the 1980 Operation Eagle Claw.
Oh, 80, yeah.
Yeah, 1980. Yeah, yes. Did I say?
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, so 1980, in April of 1980. So they wanted to, this is a really good story. And it's a horrible story, but it's a very enlightening story, let's put it that way. So they needed to get a joint operation on the ground in Tehran to rescue the hostages. They had what we would call a forward arming and refueling point at the Dasht-e Kavir Desert that was designated Desert 1, about 340 miles southeast of Tehran, if I'm remembering correctly, in the Great Salt Desert. So they had RH-53 Deltas that were sitting on the USS Nimitz that hadn't been flown in a year, that were going to fly in. They were going to have a C-141 that was going to land somewhere outside of Tehran. They had C-130s, MC-130s that were Air Force. You had Navy RH-53 Deltas flown by Marine Corps pilots with Gen 1 night vision. They didn't have, there was weather reports that were created that were not passed over to the pilots. So I guess what I should get to is that you had all these components of an extremely complicated mission, but there was no good integration with them. So what happened? They converged on Desert 1. One of the aircraft, the rotor blade, they fill these rotor blades. The system has like some inert gas in it, and you can there was some fault with it. So they had to turn around. And then they flew through what's called a haboob, which is a dust storm, a type of dust storm that had been predicted, but the prediction did not get to the people who were operating because of security clearance issues. So that didn't happen. And so they got on the ground, and none of these people had trained together either. So it was Charles Beckwith, who was the first special operations, basically combat application group today, or Delta Force, whatever. So he was there, and so he was the ground forces commander, and they made the decision at that point, because they had to have like 5 helicopters, and then 2 of them, I think it was 7 to begin with, something like that. Basically, their manpower was shrank, and they had to call it off, and then they had to refuel, and one of the helicopters browned out, ran into the fuel bladder of a C-130, and it was just a disaster. And so the key takeaway of all this, not this, the granular stuff is very interesting, but the key takeaway was there was unity of effort, and there really was no unity of command. The C2 structure was not there. The training wasn't there. There was just not a good, solid oversight to the whole thing. I mean, you had these old helicopters, they didn't train together. It was just that, forget about the kind of wildly harebrained operation that was going to take place after that. So so this disaster, which was a horrible public relations disaster, that came, the Holloway Commission sprung up. They didn't sprung up. Admiral Holloway put together a commission, and their key findings came out a year or 2 later. And out of that, a few years, in '86 came this organization where they created combatant commands, geographic combatant commands, unified combatant commands, sub-unified combatant commands. So like a unified combatant command is United States Special Operations Command. A sub-unified combatant command is one below that. That's Joint Special Operations Command. So that was, so they created that in '86. And so they said, okay, we're going to compartmentalize differently. We're going to have different individual units that are, specific to a geographic area. And we're going to pull all the talents and all the specific units together and train together. And then we're going to conduct operations. And it's going to be much more fluid. A year later, Nunn-Cohen amendment to that act, I think it was 17 April 1987, established United States Special Operations Command. And so now you've got, at this point in time going forward, you've got the main branches of the military much more integrated. So you've got much better fluid integration and operations. And this is where it gets a little esoteric, I guess. And you don't have at this point now, we've got 2 different types of forces. You've got conventional general purpose forces, Marines, sailors, airmen, soldiers, and then you have special operations personnel who are under a completely different unified combatant command, and they're not working together. So you get Operation Anaconda and you get Operation Red Wings. And there was no doctrine, as there was doctrine for the general purpose conventional forces to work together that was engendered from this disaster at Desert One. There was nothing that was brought up to integrate the special operations forces with the conventional forces. Am I adequately describing this?
Yeah, I think so.
So what you have is in Anaconda, you have a similar type of, it's similar in that it's not integrated. The specifics are different. There was communication problems in Anaconda, some ISR issues, whereas with Eagle Claw, which engendered the whole reorganization of the military, at least the conventional level, that was integration issues as well. It was just training and organizing. That wasn't well done. And so then, of course, you want to get to a point, any Marine will tell you, and I'm sure in the Army, you want to integrate, not deconflict. You never want to be deconflicting anything, right? So you want to have it all worked out smoothly and adequately. And so that's what you get that poor integration. There was no integration with the SOF and there's very little, between NAVSOF and 2-3 and Task Force COA. Task Force COA is 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. They were just sort of insular. It was not, they didn't train together. They offered them the fire support plan, fires package. They didn't integrate that. They tried to stay insular when they had all this other stuff. They had, most importantly, they had the knowledge base to say, you shouldn't be dropping in a helicopter, and I have this in the book, and you shouldn't be using 4 guys. You should walk in with more people, like we plan to do, like 6 or 8, And that's how you should do phase 0 shaping in your RNS. But because that integration wasn't baked in to how they, Marines tried to get them to do it, they didn't want to do it. That's, I'm sure people out there are going to say, oh, you're a cheerleader for the Marines or whatever, fine. But I know for a fact that they presented them with that. The Marines try to get these guys to act like Marines. And they're like, nope, we're not. Navy SEALs do things differently. And so this is what's going to happen. So from a fundamental conceptual standpoint, the integration was poor. They did not integrate in this greater joint task force that had been established all the way back by that Reorganization Act. Since then, they've gotten much better. And we'll talk I'll say that, like with Extortion 17, even though that was a disaster, one of the interesting things about that was it illuminated just how well Special Operations Forces and conventional forces are working together, because they weren't on a 160th aircraft when they got shot down. They were on a mix of active guard and reserve Army aviation, and they did this all the time. They were supported constantly, and that's because they were integrated, not between Army and Air Force and Navy, but between conventional forces and Special Operations Forces. Does that make sense? You're talking about specific branches integrating, and now you're talking about integrating force types, and that's really the fundamental breakdown. And there was a great article written and published in the November 2006 issue of the Marine Corps Gazette. It was entitled Operation Red Wings, a joint failure in unity of command, page 62, by at the time Major Robert R. Scott and Andrew McManus, the executive officer and the battalion commander of 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines for this operation. And they spell out pretty much what I just said. Not with all the Department of Defense Reorganization Act and that kind of stuff, but you have to have unity of command, which is integration. You have to one individual. Sorry, there's men and women who are commanders, but one individual, and it runs right down the line. So you guys are practitioners. You agree? I'm sure you agree with that. And it's happened over and over again. So you've got that with conventional units working together now. These days, as exemplified, we'll talk about Red Wings. It wasn't there. That integration piece wasn't there.
Given, like we have the ground situation, but it also sounds, you mentioned that there were two talks. There was the Tactical Operations Command in Jalalabad and the Tactical Operations Command in Bagram. And I mean,
split C2 right there. Split C2.
So did they do a disservice to the SEALs on the ground by like these two chefs in the kitchen, basically?
Yep. Yeah, that goes back to the poor integration, the poor unity of command, splitting the command and control. You split the command and control like that, and the whole operation, it was sort of a battle handoff after, I think, phase 2. There's phase 0 shaping, phase 1 insert and direct action, and then phase 3 I think cordon. And so between 2 and 3, they were going to do the handshake. Okay, this is your operation now, Marines. Right now, to open it up, we are the supported entity. You are supporting us, and then at this point, we're going to egress, and the operation supports you. So that's how that flowed.
And I mean, have you ever? Because I'm a bit jaded about sort of the military command structure at times,
Right.
and to me, like my initial thought is that everybody wants credit for this op that's going on. So so you don't have the continuity in command. You don't have a continuity in the both tactical and strategic picture. And then people it takes 4 hours to get things spun up when one of your teams, is out there flapping.
Yeah, that's what happened. And that goes back to, like we were talking about, when you talk about a good thing to bring up is close air support. And I know it from being with the Marines and learning about it. There's a term that they use over and over and over again. It's detailed integration. So close air support is the detailed integration of air power with other fires and maneuver elements. That's it. Detail integration. And you can take that idea, and that means like, on a conceptual level, like making sure your shoes are tied. Like you have to make sure everything has to be integrated. Every individual warfighter has to make sure that everything they've got is functioning. Their M16 service rifle, their M9 sidearm, everything is functioning, and their comm gear is working, and they know the plan, they know all that, they know everything. And that just broke down, And, they make this whole thing about how, one guy was walking around at Bagram in flip-flops. Oh, that's so cool. And I used to kind of think that was kind of cool to have, guys, in board shorts and flip-flops. No, that anymore, if I hear about that, I'm like, well, I can't do anything about it. I'm a civilian. It should just be relieved right then and there. Send them home. If they're going to be that loosey-goosey and lackadaisical, you're over there's people getting shot at, people getting killed. You have to take it seriously. And every tiny detail. And that was because when doing the photo shoots in the air and also, of course, on the ground, I mean, Marines would tell me, they said, Ed, sleep with your shoes on and make sure they're tied right, because it could get us killed if your shoes aren't on and something happens, or, up in the air, tie your shoes right. I always use that because it's such a mundane thing, but it's part of the greater integration, the detailed integration. Every single little detail has to be gone over. So, and I know Jack's been, I'm sure you've been outside the wire a bunch and on combat patrols, and you have to take. There's no such thing as being over prepared and over readied, and I think that's really what happened. That really, at the bottom line, that's a number of people they didn't plan it well enough, and the execution, the integration, the command and control structure, all of these things were broke down. Exactly which one broke down and caused this, and precipitated this, I think really it's just the planning of it. That planning was it was too loosey-goosey. When you have people saying, we've been operating here, you got to put at least a squad in, you got to have a fires plan, got to have it, and the other thing was comm. I've not been, over a decade since I published the book, type of radio that they brought with them. When the Marines went outside the wire, they brought a PRC 117, 20-watt radio, which is heavy, and the batteries are heavy, and it drops the crypto fill, when it's really hot, but you carry extra batteries and you know how to use it. The Anbar can do TACSAT or SATAC. I always get that term mixed up. Tactical satellite communication, but it's only a 5-watt radio. So, and I've had people say, "Oh, you don't need 5, you don't need 20 watts." No, but you do. They need the. You do, obviously. You need that rate, you need that comm plan nailed down. They didn't do it. So that's another one.
And I mean, it's easy. I think that the tactical element that there's been criticism leveraged at them, but a lot of people haven't taken the time to look at the command elements and say, why did this plan go down the way it went down?
Well, that's the guy Eric Christensen's dead, so, and he was in charge of signing off on that. So that's where the buck stops, right? He was in charge of it. SEALs deployed as a SEAL task unit, and he was the commander of it. So, that's, I'm trying to be as objective here. I'm not trying to denigrate a person who's dead. It's just, I'm just trying to be clinical. When someone goes into a combat situation, you have a command structure. There are expectations. There are rules. It's the way things are run. It's not, you can't hit the undo button. There's no undo button in war. We can write a book. Let's write a magazine article. There's no undo button in war. You can't hit the undo button. It's just once that poor plan is executed, that's been approved, and that poor plan has been exploited, the circumstance that has been engendered by the poor planning has been exploited by the enemy, you can't undo it.
Right.
And then after that, you're just like running around. You're 3 steps behind. Instead of thinking 2 steps ahead of the enemy, you're running 3, 4, 5 steps behind the enemy because your communications are shot. You know, there's no fire support. No one knows what's going on. You have split C2. You've got 2 tactical operation centers.
Right.
If the Marines by, they're like, okay, what's going on? You know, and that's really, and that comes down to just, you know, at a very fundamental level, integration, operational and tactical integration, and in a more specific level is just the, you know, the specific planning. Don't take 4 guys, take 12, break them apart into 3 different separate entities, because, you know, once these guys start attacking you, take cover, B and C, they can engage, you know, everybody's in good communication.
But even if he were like, you know, and I don't know, so I'm asking you, but if he were like the SEAL element commander or maybe the ground force commander or whatever, he's still not the ultimate approving authority, right? There's still like the theater command, because we're not talking about a covert action that nobody's getting read on to. Like, wasn't everybody aware up to the chief brass, whoever it was, in Afghanistan at that time?
I don't know if Kamiya, Major General Kamiya, 2-star, who was in charge of Combined Joint Task Force 76, Jason Kamiya, I don't know if he looked at the thing. I mean, the generals look at anything. They have some colonel look at it or some lieutenant colonel, and they have a major look at it. But, you know, yes, sir, it's good. But, I mean, it's at least the SOTF. In fact, definitely the SOTF, the full bird at the SOTF level, the Combined Joint CJ's Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force Alpha, Afghanistan. He looked at it, and, you know, again, he looked at it. They signed off on it. They had to sign off on it. So, but yeah, I mean, that's, again, I'm not going to. At this point, you know, we have to be as objective. I mean, we'll always be objective,
right?
But maybe a little bit more upfront and say, you know, I mean, when you're the commander, when you have a commander, even though he's dead now, you know, you still have to identify what mistakes were made by this person. And, you know, I'm not going to pile on individuals who are no longer with us, but, you know, speaking, you know, academically, just outside of these specifics of Red Wings, when you have a commander on the ground of a combat operation, and, you know, you're the one that's been briefed by all these different individuals, and, you know, the case has been made for 4 guys or 12 guys or 8 guys or whatever, and you can say, well, we want to do 12 guys, but we don't have the manpower. What do? You don't do the operation. That's what you do. You don't do it. You know, you don't say, all right, let's just, you know, F that. We're going in, man. Let's do it. You know, that's again, now we're getting into psychology, and you kind of touched on this before, a little bit of ego stuff. And I don't know if that's what happened. I'm not saying I'm saying in sort of general speculation about, you know, what may happen, what may not happen. So, you know, it's just, that's, you can't for once let your guard down when you're doing this stuff at the planning level, the operational planning level, the tactical planning level, at the execution level. And it's a lot of times, you know, things would be fine. Like, okay, well, you know, this was a bad plan. We should have sent more guys up, but we all came home. We're back inside the wire. You know, end state achieved, objective, you know, achieved, but it's still not good. It's still, that's why, you know, we've got the rules, and that's why, and I've seen this. I've seen it a couple times where, you know, again, talking about the Marines, where even if things go right, and even if they do every single thing right and the planning was good, they still get on each other. It's wild. They say, well, how could you have done that better? That's, hey, Lieutenant, how could you have made that better? And I'm thinking like, okay, well, they planned it right, they executed it right, achieved the objective, and you're still getting on this guy, So is it that way in the Army? Is it that way in the Rangers?
Yeah, I mean,
I think so.
I mean, that's what an AAR is for, right?
Tear it apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just, even if it goes well, you just tear it. They just tear it. And
was this mission
just,
was this mission torn apart afterwards, Ed?
I did.
Not by you, by the military. Did the military tear it apart?
That's a good question. That's one that the answer is no. And it's great that you brought that up because I didn't even think about that. I'm sitting here babbling on about this stuff, and then I didn't even. So very insightful of you to bring that up. Thank you, because that was a question that was brought up, and they just basically, it was embarrassing, and individuals brought it up, and individuals, within that world, within that naval special warfare world did, and that's a very infractious world. There's another thing that I found out, like SEAL delivery vehicle teams. Don't get along all that well, or at least back then didn't get all that well with the East Coast, West Coast units. I can't remember what the terms are for them. I just don't know enough about them. But I was surprised that they, like in the Marine Corps, that you get parochialism. In the Army, you get it. The Air Force, you sure. But I was surprised by the level of animosity. Speaking to some of these people after the fact, and maybe it's because of there was so much death and destruction that happened that engendered that. But I think that was never formally done, and if it was done, it is classified at a level and compartmented at a level that nobody will ever see. I think that's probably what happened.
I think it's something I think it's something of a common theme, Ed. I mean, with some of these things that go sideways. I saw an interview, someone talking about Operation Gothic Serpent in Mogadishu, and how there was never a full-blown AAR across, the spectrum of all the units involved.
Right.
The Chapman bombing, some people would contend that, exactly how that happened, and the findings of afterwards, the findings on it were not allowed to be questioned. I think this is a common theme in our nation's national security apparatus, that we kind of want to sweep it under the rug and move on.
I feel as though like when it is the guy on the ground, when it's the tactical element's fault, it'll get like. Yeah. It'll get questioned to the nth degree. When it's something that involves a higher level leadership, it's like shit happens.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack, for bringing that question up, because that is one thing that, because again, going back to my interest, it's what was the planning, what was the execution, how did it happen? Okay, now next. I never really was that interested in, pointing fingers and looking at, well, who approved and who did this and who did that. It just wasn't my thing. My thing was telling the story of Operation Red Wings as it happened, and then Operation Whales. Mm-hmm. That was it, not the after action. But, that is exactly what happened, which was now that I think about it, there was like one AAR, I believe, that was sort of higher level, and I believe it was classified at TS, and it was very compartmented. It was very much like, no one's going to be able to FOIA this. We're not going to let it get FOIA'd. We're not going to let anybody see it. Few people saw it, and that was that. That's my recollection. I'm human. Where this came from, I can't remember specifically, but I believe that was the situation. That there was one, maybe two higher level wasn't really like a summary of action. It wasn't really an AAR. It was more of a help me out here, like a lessons learned type thing. And I always tell people it's not lessons learned, it's rules reinforced, because these are mistakes that have been made over and over again. And they're just rules that are established that people know about, and they're just being reinforced. Don't say lessons learned.
Right.
It's not like the first time that this has ever happened. That's a cop out.
Right.
You know, lessons learned my ass, you know. You should have learned these lessons in, you know, whatever their version of expeditionary warfare school is.
I'm curious also, you know, what was, if in the years after you wrote this book, I mean, I know you put a ton of research into it, but afterwards you said you've learned a lot more about what happened out there during this operation. I was wondering if you would have any interest in sharing some of that with us, like what new information has come to light in your research?
The biggest thing was that they had a plan for 3 teams of 4. That to me was huge, because I went in studying mountain warfare. I mean, from the start, my introduction to the military was in the mountains, was mountain warfare, going to Afghanistan, and just that right there. There was also some stuff. Let me see. That was the big one. That was the biggest one. I don't know if that's so groundbreaking to you, it's earth-shattering to you. It is to me.
It's important,
because none of this would have happened if they had followed through with that. And I think some of the other stuff that I learned was stuff that had to do with recognition after the fact, which I don't really want to get into. You know, there's some pretty big things that I found out about afterwards that it's not important to me. I know it's important to some people. They want to know about, you know, who did this and who made that, and you know, we
don't necessarily have to get into like naming names or anything, but like if there's recognition that like something should have been done differently or could have been done differently.
Well, awards.
Yeah,
people should have gotten a higher level award.
Oh, really?
You know? Yeah.
And why do you think they weren't?
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the conjecture is that some people should, because of actions, like, you know, talk about like Danny Dietz, you know. I mean, there's never been anything definitive saying that, you know, he did not make a phone call on the satellite phone. In fact, there's a person I talked to who said, I received a phone call and it was from him.
Wow.
Yeah. It was from him. Now there's other people that, you know, say, well, no, that's not the case. And I mean, but the thing is, like, it doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, it's you know,
right.
It doesn't matter from the perspective of looking at this from, you know, tactics unfurling. It makes a difference for people giving credit based on awards that happened posthumously. So I personally think that Danny Dietz made at least one phone call. I mean, he was the communication specialist. I think he made at least one phone call. And Danny Dietz, by the way, was extremely proficient and very, he had a lot of experience, very experienced warfighter. And we talked, and I'll just go ahead and talk about this a little bit. You know, I did watch Lone Survivor, and I did see how he was portrayed. And from the people that I spoke with about him, who were not his family members, but people who knew him professionally, that was a very, it was not an accurate portrayal of this individual, of him and how he functioned. He was very skilled, and, you know, he sort of made to look like kind of someone who was a neophyte, unfortunately. I mean, I'm not the first person to say this at all. There's been a book written about it, but it's just, you know, some of the stuff that, again, going back to my focus is, you know, on the actual undertaking of the operation, not who gets what award after the fact. But, you know, there is some there's reasons for these things, you know, for awards and for the reasons of it. But I do believe that he if they're going to give a Medal of Honor to somebody for making a phone call, then he deserves one too.
There are times that the military has used awards to help them craft a narrative.
Right.
Do you feel that's one of the reasons why he wasn't given an award, or do you feel that there was another reason behind it?
I don't know. I don't know at all. It's such a, I see stuff portrayed, having been there on the ground, not during the operation, but afterwards, in those mountains, and I see how stuff was portrayed. I can say it's really obvious to me why things are wrong, or why the narrative that I see being portrayed about certain types of warfare, or how things happen. It's just obvious to me because I've been there, right? Done it, and not done it as a military practitioner, but as an observer. I just don't know enough about the Navy SEAL world. I just don't know. What I do know is that there's some parochialism, vicious parochialism, or there had been, and that's kind of, and that's just, and again too, because I don't know, because I've never embedded with them. I mean I did work with them to a certain extent on the operation or on the Extortion 1-7 book, and I had a wonderful experience. I've worked with some others, about this, subsequent to my book being published, about Red Wings, and they're great people, wonderful. It doesn't seem, but I do understand that there's almost a level of animosity among some of the units, like certain SEAL teams and certain, other support capabilities in the Navy SEAL world. But I'm not really the one to have you had anybody on SEALs who could get into this?
No, not SEALs who were involved in the operation. No, mostly Rangers and 160th guys.
Yeah, we've had.
Have you had any SEALs on to talk about just the sort of internal culture and culture clashes?
A bit,
a little bit. Like we have a reputation of being SEAL haters, which we're not. We've had a few SEALs on. We like to joke around about
programming
SEALs,
note. I have a programming note. This Tuesday we have a former SEAL Team 6 member on the show. So
who's that?
His name is Nelson Miller.
Okay, I don't know.
He's never been on any other podcast.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be cool to hear from him, because these guys usually work their way up through the plain vanilla before they go to Dam Neck, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're all about one team, one fight. Like, everybody's out there hooking and jabbing and doing what they can. SEALs are fun to poke. It's fun to poke at them.
Sure,
but they're
tremendously good guys that come out of the SEAL teams too.
Yeah.
I don't want to overlook that.
Yeah.
But like you said, I mean, my main interest is kind of just like drilling down into what did happen, what didn't happen.
Yeah, you don't want to see this happen again.
Right.
Because now we're a generation removed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people who are in the military now, they have no idea. Operation Red what? I mean,
well,
it's
on that note, Ed, could you talk to us about Operation Whalers? Because I feel like that's not spoken about as much. I mean, could you set the stage for what that operation was?
Well, as the executive officer of the battalion and the operations officer of the battalion said to me right off the bat, when I asked him that question, they said there were no SEALs involved. This was, no SEALs involved. And so that's what I was told right off the bat. So Operation Whalers, it kicked off in early August of 2005. And basically it was going to be forced movement to contact. They were going to have an element in the Korengal Valley push in. They're going to have an element in the Shuriak Valley push in toward the summit of Satala Sar. Those are coming from the north. They're going to have an element, a mounted, and then I think maybe dismounted unit, part of what they call a MAP, mobile assault platoon, come in from the Naray Valley. And then they were going to have another element come in from the Chowkay Valley, which is also called the Duagal Valley, and Diwegal, Duagal Valley. And they figured that they were going to take contact in the Korengal Valley and then try to egress. Ahmad Shah's force was going to try to maybe egress out the Narang Valley or out the Shuriak Valley. So what happened was, it was a joint operation. The focus was on Marine infantry, and there were all line companies and the weapons company. So real quick, the table of organization for Marine Infantry Battalion is you have 3 line companies and a headquarters and services company, under which falls snipers, and then you've got a weapons company. So in terms of sort of operational forces, you've got 4 of them. Typically, the weapons company is broken up and divvied out. Their assets are to, like a machine gunner, tow missile, that kind of thing. It's, that at that point, they were still working on a mentality from Cold War type stuff. They were getting out of it, but they turned the weapons company into a mobile assault platoon. So you have Echo Company, Echo, Fox, and Golf, EF&G, and then weapons company that was retasked as this mobile assault platoon group. They call them Whiskey. Of course they call them Whiskey, right? They're Marines. So you had, Echo in the Korengal Valley and some of the Shiriak Valley, Golf in Naray, and then the Narang Valley. And then you had Fox Company go up to the Chowkay Valley. And boy, it was a movement. It was a tough movement, but these guys took contact. They ended up taking contact in the Chowkay Valley, so it was Fox Company. And it was 2 or 3 days of sustained contact, and they killed a lot of Ahmad Shah's guys, and he fled. He did escape at night. He got out of there. Which is, you look at the terrain, look at some of the topographical maps, and it was a he was able to escape, but the operation itself was conducted, squeezing this guy out from these different valleys. So you've got it in from the north and from the south, and then a little bit from the east. And he squirted out and got into Asadabad and left, but it destroyed the movement to contact, the contact that resulted, destroyed his little army, and he never was able to regain any type of influence in the region. So that's and it was a great example of joint operations, of specifically with the integration of fires, where you had multiple troops in contact in this whole area simultaneously. So you had the integration of artillery, 81 millimeter mortars. You had close air support with Apaches. Now, a real quick side note on Apaches, because the Army considers them a maneuver element and not an indirect fire asset, that produces some issues.
We just talked about this with Don Bentley.
They were able to work through, so they were able to work through that with what's called Type 3 control with parameters. Shock troop was there, which the individual you were talking about before, I believe he was a shock troop pilot. So they conducted exceptional close air support, or as they would say, close combat attack. And then there was A-10s, or their call sign was BOR. So you had Air Force A-10s, Army, Apaches, Army artillery, Marine mortars, and Marine heavy guns. Even some tow missiles were used, which is part of the Whiskey Company, the weapons company, retasked as a mobile assault platoon group. I say, the company, and of course there's, just for anybody out there who doesn't know, like the MAPs, the mobile assault platoons, there was 3 of those per the weapons company. So as I just kind of say, it's a group of them. Yeah, the group is the company. The individual elements are the platoons, the mobile assault platoons. So that's how that went. And it was, I believe there was one Marine who was killed during the egress, Philip George, egressing in the Korengal Valley. There was a small tick, and then they got A-10s in there to clean up the guys who did that. But yeah, that was, and then they got out of there, and then they, that was the egress, and it was an amazing. Now we're getting a little technical, little rah-rah Marine Corps. Basically, in the Marines, I would call it nowadays a multi-domain task force, because they're so, they're all the talk that they're doing is like, integration with the Navy and all this stuff, but they call it, which they have to do because the focus now is on U.S. Indo-PACOM and the South China Sea, but their war fighting DNA. It's called the MAGTF, the Marine Air Ground Task Force. Again, it's a multi-domain task force because it's a combined arms construct to include now cyber, swarms of UAS if they're doing that. I don't know. All these different capabilities all put together. And normally, you've got a thing called a MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is based around a battalion of Marines, the Victor Battalion. And then you've got, artillery, logistics, the ACE, the air combat element, all these things put together on a ship, and they go over. And you've got a MEF, Marine Expeditionary Force. It's a division level. I hope I'm not screwing this up. This is like really Marine Corps, basic Marine Corps 101. A friend's going to see this and be like, hey, you dummy. There's a MEB, Marine Expeditionary Brigade, which is a regimental level, and then a MEF, which is a division level. Yeah. So, but what these guys did was they have a term called SP MAGTF, Special Purpose MAGTF. They essentially did an ad hoc Special Purpose MAGTF. They integrated it into the assets that they were given, or allocated by Task Force Devil, which was the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. It was Colonel Donahue, I believe. Is it the 504th? They're based out of Salerno, is that right? In Italy?
I think that...
173rd is based out of Italy.
Okay, there was CJTF 76. Below that was there's CJ Sodaf Alpha, and then of course, there was Task Force Devil, TF Devil, and that was an 06 level full-bird Colonel Donahue, and below that was Task Force COA. COA is the 2-3. They're no longer an active infantry battalion. The new commandant, they've reorganized the Marine Corps, so they're on hold for now. We'll call it. We won't say they're over. We'll just say they're on hold for another day. But so 2-3 Task Force COA, 05 Lieutenant Colonel Command. They fell under Donahue, the Task Force Devil, and so Devil was able to push assets to them, assault support assets like helicopters, and they had the artillery. So normally, when a Marine battalion goes into, at their endemic war fighting capability, it's the MAGTF, the Marine Air Ground Task Force. So they have all that stuff under their own. Talk about integration. Talk about really, really effective integration. Again, Marine Corps cheerleader here, I guess, but those guys who are doing 9 lines on the ground, like they know all the pilots, they're friends with them, they know them, like they know them, and they all the, so-and-so, and, bring in this guy, and they know it really well. So throw them into a combined task force, a joint task force, like as they were, they pulled it off. They did it. There was some frustration, like, why can't you get these helicopters here and whatever, Marines are going to complain about it because they don't own it, but they did it. They figured it out. And it was a very successful military operation. I'm very fortunate to have been able to be the guy who wrote the book about it. So that, to me, really was the gist of that book that I wrote, Victory Point. But that was the culmination of it. Those Troops in Contact episodes in the Chowkay Valley with Fox Company, and then, there was also some other, the task force, Team Ronin, which was part of Headquarters and Services Company, they're the scout sniper team. They got in a tick. That was, we were talking earlier about using getting a call for fire and cleaning up the enemy with 105s. But there was stuff going all around. But it's a really, if you read everybody, I'll just plug the book. Everybody buy the book. Okay, read the book. And not because to enrich me, but to so people can know about what happened.
Oh, but we want to enrich you also. So everybody buy the book.
Well, and
Thanks, yeah.
we haven't even spoken about Extortion 17 yet. So I would love to shift gears over to that for a moment.
Perfect. Yeah. No, we can. So what do you want to know? You want to how I get involved in it, the story, all that stuff?
I mean, tell us about the story, about what your research uncovered about, what that, first off, for the people who don't know what Extortion 17 was, and the findings of your work on it.
So Extortion 17 was the call sign of a helicopter, a CH-47D Chinook helicopter operated by an Army Aviation Task Force, GSAB. I know the Marine Corps pretty well, not the Army so well. GSAB, General Support Aviation Brigade. Yeah, GSAB. I think it would be a brigade, not a battalion, right, Jack?
Aviation, not my thing either.
Yeah, I think a GSAB is a General Support Aviation Brigade, and so they had Chinooks, and they had UH-60s, and I believe they had dust-offs there, which were UH-60s, and they were based at FOB Shank, and they were ISO. They're in a joint task force, and so this is an example of how far we've come from Anaconda and Red Wings, because they were regularly supporting, primarily not just plain vanilla soft, they were supporting TF East, Task Force East, which was Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Tactical Development and Evaluation Squadron. Is it 3 Gold? TAC Devron 3, is that who that is, Jack? I think,
oh, geez. I can't remember how the numbers correlate with the colors off
it was
the top
gold.
of my head.
It was Gold Squadron, the line.
Yes.
And it was, they were co-located at Shank. There was the JSOC headquarters and down the road there was Extortion Company, and so there was Task Force Darby, or TF Red, which you guys are intimately familiar with. That is the Ranger component. And was it 275 or 37? I can't remember who
it was
there.
275. I mean,
275.
Nick Moore was 275, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it was 275, and it was Gold Squadron, and so they would swap. They were getting a lot of really great intel, because they had a task. They had access to really good intelligence collections and processing, and so there was a lot of activity coming from Pakistan into Afghanistan. It was the people say it was the Haqqani network. That's primarily who their target was, not the Taliban. Of course, there was like 20 of these groups. They're all mixed in together, and it's easy to say, oh, like calling a Pepsi a Coke. It's like, oh, the Taliban, but they were the Haqqani network, and they had their HVTs, and they were going in there, and they would. So Extortion, they supported them, which I know the Marines call it assault support. I believe the Army calls it that as well. Basically, you're lifting, you're carrying units in. They would get an objective. They would get the imagery intel, and a lot of the other intel, that the pattern of movement, pattern of life, and they would all these cats and dogs were constantly being monitored, and they finally all these are intel triggered ops. So there's a trigger. And they say, okay, and the trigger may be a SIGINT hit, a mass int hit, a measurement and signature intelligence hit, or something. Usually it's actually anymore. Even back then, it was in 2011, a fusion of all this stuff. And they would say, okay, objective Lefty Grove is going to be at this grid at this time, because we got him on, a combination of human intelligence or whatever. And so they would go in, and, one night it would be TF Darby, would be the main element going in and doing the hit, and then TF Blue. Again, I'm starting to use terms that they're interchangeable. So,
yeah.
We'll just call them TF Blue. That's the Navy, the SEALs, the AFGRU guys. Task Force Blue, Task Force Red is the Army Rangers. One night, the Red guys, the Army 75th would be the main element, and the immediate reaction force standing by would be blue. And then the next night, because there was a crazy op tempo. Sometimes they would do 3 raids a night, and so, Extortion, they were responsible for both, for the insert and then the egress, getting them out of the exfil, the infill, the exfil, and they were also there standing by for IRF, immediate reaction force. And so the some of the different types of inserts that they would do, sometimes they would just land, like quarter mile away, half mile away, and these guys would, move into contact, or they would encircle them. Sometimes they would land very close to the target building. And sometimes they do this thing. It's amazingly cool to me. It's called MAF, Mobile Assault Force, where I should have a video on YouTube. I got a hold of it and put it on YouTube. What can I tell you? So these guys would have quads and dirt bikes, and they would land them outside of the oral range, the hearing range of the enemy. And these guys would ride their dirt bikes and quads, stash them, and then foot mobile op, do their operation, and then get back in. And it's really pretty cool seeing some of this stuff. Like, I've got some TADS PINVIS, some infrared thermal imagery of, like the helicopters on the ground. And then, you see these guys come in and you're just like, wow, that's cool. And then you see them land and get out and they take off again. It's really amazing. But so they supported these guys and every night. And the bottom line is, when the helicopter Extortion 17 that was shot down in the Tangi Valley on 6 August 2011, it was just a lucky shot. The guy heard it. He had, an auditory reference. He aimed an RPG, him and another guy, they aimed an RPG at it, and they shot in a general direction, and it hit a rear rotor blade, took off 122 inches of it. Now, a Chinook and other helicopters can fly, and they have flown, and I've seen video of them flying with chunks of their rotor blades missing, but not 122 inches. That's like over 10 feet, right? Yeah. So there was a catastrophic, basically breakup of the aircraft, and due to the extreme gyroscopic forces, everybody on board was killed more or less instantly. And they went down, and then they went to recover, and it was a terrible day. It was 30 Americans, and in addition to that, there were 8 Afghans, and there was a dog, an American dog. So some people say 31 Americans because they count the dog, and other people get very offended by that because the people whose, their loved ones who died, who are humans, they say, well, you're not a dog, okay? The dog died. I love dogs, so I'm just laying it all out there like in journalism you're supposed to do. So there was 30 Americans, 8 Afghans, and an American dog that died. Mm-hmm. So I'm putting you to sleep.
No. You said that the contrast between this and Red Wings is that there's really good interoperability. You mentioned how TF Red and TF Blue were working really well together. In the aftermath of that crash, Nick Moore told us his, kind of boots on the ground account, which was terrible to
he was one of the guys that they approached it. They were on the road, and they were going across the field, and I've seen that from the air, from the TADS PINVIS. That's actually out there more or less, so not open source, but it's out there. But I do remember reading that. He had that in his book, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. And I also read your book on Extortion 17, which is goes into the minute details of these helicopters and how they work and what happened. It was really
do it, man.
It was really a tremendous work. It really is, and I highly recommend the book to anyone who wants to know about Extortion 17. That's just obvious, but anyone who wants to know about how military aviation, rotary wing aviation works, I think would be really well served by reading your book.
Yeah, Army aviation. Army aviation is amazing. I love Army aviation. They're great. They're amazing.
And so what, I'll ask you the same question that I did about Red Wings. What were some of the big findings in the aftermath of that came out in your research?
Well, in terms of after Extortion 17?
You tell me. Yeah, in terms of the crash and how that transpired.
Well, it was just a lucky shot. And a lot of people ask me, how could they, again, and we're going to go into some technical things. First, I want to cover real quickly, stop me if I start going too much on a tangent, but I want to emphasize that in the years from the Red Wings disaster to Extortion 17, you had asked about, what types of after actions and all this kind of stuff. Well, that I know about, it was, there was just that one or maybe two, but clearly the military did learn something from that and Anaconda, because, it was dumb luck by the enemy, shooting down Extortion 17. And I will give a quick vignette. In 2012, a Cobra, an AH-1 whiskey, an AH-1W Cobra in 2012 was shot down ingressing on an attack run. He was at 500 feet up in the air, and a guy shot the tail off, which is like this wide. It's like not even a foot wide, with an RPG, a ballistic system. So he got lucky.
Yeah.
Killed both those guys. But anyway, so fast going from Red Wings up to Extortion 17. Again, the Extortion 17 shoot down was just dumb luck by those guys. They were just the right place at the wrong time, and they shot a volley and they got him. But when you look at the day-to-day function of the Task Force Red and Task Force Blue working together, like they worked very well together, great together, and then being supported by conventional Apaches, those aren't special operations aircraft, conventional assault support. In fact, 90%, I think more than 90% of all of the special operations, the Joint Special Operations Command activities on the ground during that deployment were supported by conventional aviation, 90%. So I should mention too that in the aftermath of the Operation Eagle Claw, that's where the 160th came from. That was one of the phoenixes to rise from the ashes. But even more enduring is the idea of interoperability, so that you have a situation many years later where special operations units are being supported every night, every POD, every period of darkness by conventional aviation. And that's how it works now. And it's a good thing. Okay, so what's the next? I think, so the other takeaway is this when I explain this to people. So lethality really comes down at a conceptual level. When you talk about, we're in an age of precision weapons. A Marine is a precision weapon because a Marine will shoot an M16 service rifle. They cannot go outside the wire. They cannot deploy unless there's standards. I don't know what it is. It's like, what are they going to shoot at 550 yards or 350? I can't remember. I'm sure the Army has the same standards. They are a precision system. It's not just a joint defense attack munition or an LGB, a laser-guided bomb. That's a precision system. So when you're in this situation where we're not just swinging clubs and throwing rocks and in warfare, lethality really comes down, or I don't like to say lethality, I like to say combat efficacy, which subsumes lethality. Sometimes you don't want to blow the building up or kill the people. You want to be combat effective in that regard, or you have the capability, but you don't do it, but to kill and blow stuff up. It comes down to two factors, which is situational awareness and signature. So let's say we're on patrol and we're going down, and all of a sudden we get a tick starts, and boom, pop, 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 and dust is flying up. So our SA, like where are they shooting from, is like 0, but our signature is high because we've given the enemy a capability of hitting us. Mm-hmm. So immediately, what do? We go to ground. So our signature is optimized for us. Now we have to optimize our situational awareness, right? Are you tracking? Mm-hmm. This is like infantry tactics one, like basic, but I'm putting it in these more fancy terms that will make sense. So now we need to build our SA higher. We need to optimize it. We can use these days unmanned systems. We can look, whatever. I'm talking about organic to our element. We need to get up and look. So we get up and look, and so now our signature is not optimized, and we can get hit, but we're building SA. Okay, so good, we got it. I think, and this is the world according to me, SA and signature. SA is slightly more important than signature because you can't just go through a combat operation like an ostrich with your head in the sand. You have to be always building your SA at a little bit of expense of signature. So So there you go. That's the basis of combat efficacy and lethality, because now we've got eyes on where the point of origin of the fire is coming from, and now we can engage and kill and continue on with the operation. What happened with Extortion 17 coming in was just sort of an outlier. Their signature was not optimized because it was loud, and but the SA of the enemy was not optimized either. They didn't have a target to shoot at. They didn't have a man pads. They didn't have like an SA-7, like a heat-seeking missile. They were just like, it was just, they left their situational awareness up to luck, and they got lucky. Yeah. That's it. Bottom line. Now, going forward, people say, "Oh, how can we keep this from occurring?" Well, you could drop a W-88 thermonuclear weapon on the valley, 475 kilotons, and just completely obliterate it. Well, then you don't even need anybody on the ground. But in the future, might we have the ability to build situational awareness so well that we can know where every weapon is and what weapon might be employed against us, and could we potentially augment our ingress? Not now. Doesn't exist. Technologically doesn't exist. Theoretically, conceptually, it might exist at some point in the future. So when they say, could this be prevented in the future? When you take what I explained about the situational awareness and the signature, because you're dealing with SA and signature on both levels, on both sides, on our side and the enemy side. We always want to optimize ours. That's the basis of an F-35, by the way. You talk to an F-35 pilot and they'll still laugh at you. Say, well, can it do Mach 10 or Mach 3, or can it do loops? How maneuverable is it? Doesn't matter, because that thing is optimized for signature, and it's optimized, I will tell you, for situational awareness at the operational level, and to feed that down at the tactical level, and through both passive mechanisms, through scans, and through active mechanisms, which is like putting out, sparkle, putting out, okay, well, where's this guy at? Okay, he's right over there. Okay, let me download this digital 9, this digital whatever they've got. But that's the takeaway in the future, is that if you can extrapolate what we're doing now with just being able to see what's going on in an area, and to just filter out all the noise and all the BS, and figure out, because there's going to be all sorts of guns, like which gun is going to get used, which RPG is going to get used. That's another thing. We only have so much space. We only have so much bandwidth, that it's physically impossible.
And the golden BB is.
Yeah, the golden BB or big plane, little sky.
Right.
Yeah. So theoretically, conceptually, can we stop this in the future? Yeah, we don't have the technology for it. It would take all the computing power we have and all the scanners we have, to try to figure that out. And it's just, that's part of war. There's risk. There's no such thing as going to war and having a guarantee. I will tell you that, having embedded 6 times, I am eminently aware of that. It kind of rings true.
But Ed, I just want to, because there was something we skipped in your origin story, and in who you are, that in addition to being a journalist and a photographer, and having your degree in geography, right? This isn't all theoretics to you, in a way, in the sense that you also have patents, right? You also have patents for
I do.
For aircraft, and which is so bizarre in the sense that you don't have a degree in engineering, you don't have a career in that hasn't been you've been out there on the front lines and on nice in mountaintops taking pictures. So like how much of this for you is because you do have also this oddly weird aberrant path of these aerospace patents,
right?
How much of this is sort of the futurist of you, like kind of figuring this stuff out?
So great question. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about this, but I have done work in systems development and integration for unmanned systems, for tactical employment, for the optimization of situational awareness and signature. At the employment at the tactical level, for the optimization of SA and signature at both the tactical and the operational levels. And so where that comes from is initially is from observation, right? And observation of being there and seeing it and talking to practitioners and hearing how things could be done better. Because you want to design things for tactical effects and operational end states. So operational end states are the aggregate of tactical effects. So just to sort of break that down a little bit, say the objective of the operation is to seize an airfield. So how are we going to do that? Well, you're going to say we have to destroy the radar system, we have to disable the aircraft, and we have to destroy the C2 architecture. So however we do that, whether we kill people or blow stuff up, the individual acts against these things are tactical effects. And then altogether, the operational end state is that we have a seized airfield because we're able to maneuver people onto the ground on that airfield, right? So to be able to develop systems, when you want to develop systems that optimize warfighter efficacy in these regards, you really want to bring everybody home. I've had friends who Memorial Day is coming up, and someone said, well, they brought that out. I say, hey, every day is Memorial Day to me. It really is. I'm sure to you guys, every day, you know people who didn't come back. And so that's kind of a driving force. You want to make sure everybody comes back, and nobody really wants to kill people and blow stuff up, right? And so we develop a force where not me, we America, United States, not me, but the military develops the capabilities so that whether it's unmanned systems or whether it's manned systems or whatever, based on sort of they're basing it on their after actions, on their observations, and you observe, you discuss what types of operational end states you want and what type of tactical effects that you're going to need to engender those operational end states, and then you conceptualize mechanisms to achieve that, and then you develop systems and you test them. So am I talking to you? Is this getting too esoteric?
No, it's not. It's just that
for me personally, it's observation and discussion, and there's personal stuff to it too. How do we get this? How do we make sure everybody comes back? And even more so, how do we get it so that American forces show up and everybody just says, we give up?
Right.
Because you know what? At the strategic level, we're there.
Right.
The operational and tactical level, we're not. At the strategic level, we have the Ohio class submarines, soon to be replaced by the Columbia class. And there is no touching that at all. Nobody will mess with this at the strategic level.
Ed, I just want to, because I want to pull this kind of together. Like, we're talking about, your experience with the military and this and that. When did you file your first patent?
Oh boy, that was like 20 years ago.
So a minute before like Red Wings, and so how many do you play musical instruments?
No.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out the level of your savantness right now. Because again,
my parents tried to get me to be a pianist, and I resisted, and I continued. I couldn't even. I think there's 88 keys on a piano. That's all I know.
Which is more than Jack or I know.
Yes.
And probably your rendition of Chopin like matches our rendition as like merrily we go along. But how did you do that? How did you?
I just did it, man. You know what? The bottom line, it's America. And it's what we do, It's like you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
I guess. Jack, how many patents do you have?
None.
D, how many patents do you have filed with the patent office?
I actually have 4.
Do you really?
No.
and
D invented the sham. Wow, not a lot of people know that about him. But
No. Well, he invented a super absorbent cloth that was advertised on late night TV. It's just. it's amazing to me because you're talking about these things in sort of a disassociated, this is what we could do, but you're also like this super genius who was filing patents as early as like 2003.
Well, the patents that those things were for have nothing to do with the systems that I've worked with since then. You know, and the systems that I've worked with since then are really nothing special. They're just, you know, they basically enable and it was all very experimental, and it's really not going on anymore. It's all been tested, and it's like, okay, you know, we've proven this concept. I wrote an article for the Marine Corps Gazette in 2014, and it was about a small unmanned system, aircraft system that was to be employed by a small at the tactical level for optimization of situational awareness and signature at the tactical and operational levels. That included both passive and active mechanisms. So that's, you know, so you can do like remote sparkle, remote illumination. That's a big thing or remote marking. So you can maintain optimized signature, cover, defilade position, and still mark a target, see it, and, you know, do a talk on with that. So it's actually very low tech, but it's just something that.
Do we have questions for Ed?
Yeah. Let me get to those. I just wanted to pay tribute to you in the sense that, like, you don't like talk about all your achievements, so I'm gonna talk about them for you. It's just, to me, because again, like, we can sit here, like Jack and I can talk about, oh, what would be great for the warfighter, but we've never filed a patent, and a patent isn't just a, hey, here's a good idea. It's like a detailed
It's an
summary,
invention.
right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like writing a book, like, or telling the story of the Marine Corps. It's and you know, it's like, hey, are you going to do this or not? Right.
That's
like,
a good comparison.
Are you going to do it or not? Like, okay,
right.
Hey, I support the troops, or I want to like write a book about the military or something, and you know, I'm like, I'm going to do it. So I'm selling my house, and I'm going to go to Afghanistan in war with the Marines. And that's, you know, I mean, I don't know. I'm not patting myself on the back on that. That's just what I did.
Yeah, get out there and do it.
And the same thing with systems. The same thing with systems development and integration. It's like, hey, you know, got an idea. Here's the idea. Published it, and okay, well, let's build it. So I built it. I built a bunch of it actually, and tested it. Marines tested it. So.
That's amazing. We only have one question actually, and it's from Luis Vasquez. Oh, actually, did your patent experience help you become a better journalist?
Good question.
Yeah, all of it does. You know, everything in life is integrated, right? I mean, here we are. How many times have I said integrated tonight? Like, you know, but it's in writing and thinking, when to be able to. I think we want to cut this off. It's been 2 hours and 20 minutes. I can talk all night, but you know, when you write a book or anything about writing, conveying something, you know, one of my Ed Darackisms is there's no writer's block. There's subject comprehension block. Like, we can write a story, you know, about like, okay, going to the refrigerator and getting a drink of water. Like, that's easy because we comprehend that. But when you get into concepts and other things, it's like you really sort of stumble along. You're like, wow, you know, like, you know, so how am I going to talk about like hope and achievement and all these other things? How am I going to describe that? I cannot lucidly comprehend these bizarre concepts. So not so esoteric is, say, we'll talk about like, you know, designing a certain device. And in the world of patents, you have to, they're called claims. There's independent claims and dependent claims. And so for a utility patent, you have to describe it. And the trick is to describe it as broadly as possible, to not get patent lawyers. If someone's listening, they're going to say, "Oh, well, he does not quite right." But you have to pass what's called the unobviousness concept. So you can't patent like a wheel, like, okay, it's obvious, dummy. One patent that's very interesting that's used a lot is aspirin to fatten up pigs. Somebody patented that because it was, acetylsalicylic acid, which is what aspirin is, was already invented as an analgesic for, to cure pain or to alleviate pain. But somebody figured out when they fed pigs aspirin, it made them get fatter. So they patented that, so the trick in patents is you have to adequately describe your invention, and you have to do it in a way that it's not so hyper specific that it's easy for other people to patent around it or to invent around it. Now, to sort of summarize, to get because we didn't do this to talk about patents or intellectual property. I can talk about that all night too, but you have to really, really comprehend the subject. Your invention is your subject, and you have to understand it so well. So, like writing a book about the Marine Corps, it's the same thing. You can't just like, oh, I'm going to call up 29 Palms and see what these guys are doing, combined arms or whatever. What are these soldiers doing down there with close air support? You have to go there.
Right. You can't read somebody else's
By the
book.
way, I just said soldier I said that intentionally to
that's a line you don't cross. That's a line you don't cross.
I was doing it. I was going to slip up. It was my own. I was intentionally saying that to come across as a dummy. But the thing is, you have to go and do it. You got to do it. You want to write about the Marines. You want to write about anything. You want to write about Extortion 17. I was not able to go there and in that specific Tangi Valley, but I've flown a lot on CH-47Ds, and you talk to different pilots and crew members, and you study it, and you observe, and you formulate the story. You grasp, you understand the story. There's no story comprehension block. You got it. Same thing with a patent. So does that answer the question?
Yeah. So we have one more question that just came in. Thank you, Ian. Fantastic guest, guys. Ed's a legit warrior poet, mad scientist. I agree. Ed, being like a sort of savant dilettante, but successful in many areas, give us like 2 lines, the secret of success.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, that's it. That's I don't consider myself successful. I'm just very fortunate. I've got to meet some very wonderful people, but the one thing that I would tell people when I get invited to go to talk at classes is just, it's a small world, and always be on your best behavior. I'll tell you a quick story about Afghanistan. I was in Pakistan in 1999 to photograph mountains. And I showed, this was before 9/11, obviously, 1999, we can all do math. But the first thing I read at getting off the plane was Osama calls for the death of every American male. And when I was in the cities, I actually smoked cigarettes back then, and I would go outside and smoke. And the one proprietor of this one hotel said, "Hey, you're an American. Don't stand in front of my hotel. You can stay here, but you're making me look bad." I mean, it was like thick, It was, and I went to Nanga Parbat and photographed Nanga Parbat, which is the 9th highest mountain in the world. And then I wanted to go to K2, but as my backup plan, I wanted to go to the Wakhan corridor. Going to K2 is really a big undertaking. I didn't climb it, but I eventually did go there and photograph it. It was great. The photographs have ended up on a lot of book covers and stuff, magazines and stuff like that. But I went in 1999 as a backup to the Afghan consulate in Rawalpindi, and it was operated by the Taliban. And I met the Taliban, and they told me, "We'll give you a visa, but then we're going to kill you when you come." They said that. And I was like, "Yes, I'm not going to the Wakhan corridor." And so I left that, I went back and I met up with some other people, and we made it to K2, and I came back. And then 6 years later, I was with the Marines in Waterpore and Waterpore Village. And, I'm getting on my way out to Camp Blessing, and I'm sitting there with the Marines, and they had just met me. And this Pakistani guy comes in, Pakistani Afghan guy comes in to this courtyard. The Marines were meeting with the local police chief, and this one guy is pointing at me, and he's like excitedly talking, and the interpreter comes up and said, 6 years ago in Rawalpindi, he was a bus driver and you got on his bus.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, it is a small world. Behave yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and and I had long hair and a beard then, and I looked like who's the guy that he was the Johnny Walker Lindh. I looked like Johnny Walker Lindh. The Marines were looking at me like, well, who is this guy? You know. So when I got to Camp Blessing, I shaved and got a haircut. But that is a small world story. So, but I just think that I've been very fortunate. I get to work with wonderful, amazing people, to include you guys. Right now, we're working together. Right, we're communicating to the world stuff, and that just behave. Don't throw a fit because the Taliban says they're going to kill you on the bus afterwards. Fucking Taliban. Who are these guys, man? They were the real deal too, man. They had like the mascara and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, oh my God, I wish I had a photograph. There's going up the Karakoram Highway. We would stop and, the bus would stop, and every other store was like a gun store. And I went around it's not that far from Peshawar where I was, which is like the fake gun, they copy Enfield rifles and everything.
Right.
But counterfeit gun capital of the world. That's the word I'm thinking of, counterfeit. But this one store had all these little placards, and it was a picture of Mullah Omar and Osama bin Laden with an AK-47 and a PK crossed, and it said, "Osama and Omar, we salute you." And I was like, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll take a picture of this, and they didn't let me take it. And I asked them if I could get one of those posters. I knew who these guys. I didn't know who Mullah Omar was, but I had heard of Osama bin Laden, and that would have been interesting to have if I had gotten that or a
For
picture
sure.
of it. But that was anyway. That was to answer your question. I always just try to be a nice guy. Like I said, when going up to 70th Rangers, I would never say, "Oh, I know all about this military stuff," because I don't. Say, "Hey, teach me," and just be probably best thing is just be open to learning.
Yeah.
Ed, do you have any future projects that you want to books coming out that you want to tease out there? Let us know about.
I got tons of stuff I'm working on, but I'm not going to say anything.
Come
right
on,
now.
Ed.
Yeah, I can't.
Come on.
I'm working on. I can't say. I just got to keep it for myself.
If people want to check out your photography, is there like I checked out your website, but you don't have like it listed there.
Yeah.
Is there a place?
Put on LinkedIn. If you go to LinkedIn, like
Okay.
if you just go Ed Darack in LinkedIn, like I'm the only Ed Darack there is. There's not too many people with the last name Darack anyway. But I actually, I was at a point where I had finished up a bunch of projects, and a friend of mine, and I said, God, it's the first time in like 10 years I don't have any major things on the to-do list. And my friend's like, well, go to LinkedIn and fix up your LinkedIn. I go, oh, okay, I'll do that. So I went nuts. And I actually made some an interesting document, and it's not just for my ego. I think people would learn from it, of photography credits, and like there's everything from a stamp. A photograph of mine is using a Canadian postage stamp to like those accessories, those posters that say those inspirational ones.
Hang in there.
Yeah, no, it's teamwork jets.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of stuff. So and I have that. So I put that. I made a document on there. You can go see it. I mean, look at my LinkedIn. I always just joke that LinkedIn is Facebook for people over 30. Well, I'm definitely over 30. And so there you go. I'm on LinkedIn.
Fantastic.
Well, yeah, I really encourage people to go and check out your books about Red Wings, Extortion 17, Marines in Anbar province. We didn't even really get to Victory Point about Operation Whalen. I mean, I highly recommend the stuff I've read was just amazing, and I hope people will go and check it out. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's do this again at some point. We can talk about the Marines in Anbar at some point.
I would love to.
I was like, that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, and we didn't even talk about it at all.
Sorry. I'd be happy to have you back again and talk about that. So on what is it, Tuesday, D? Nelson Miller, former SEAL Team 6 operator. We'll have him on the show Tuesday, and that's kind of where we're at right now. We got a good lineup for the next couple months.
Yep, and Victory Point. And then after
It's called. So the books are The Warriors of Anbar,
Right.
and there's another. I have a photography book called War Moments, and then I've got The Final Mission of Extortion 17, and then Victory Point. But if you just go to like just Google my name and then go to Amazon,
It'll come up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, we could say it's your favorite bookstore, but I think everybody gets their books from Amazon now.
yeah,
Oh,
you
man.
know, it's
The publishers have a problem when you say that,
It's convenient and it's sad.
but I do too. I do.
I don't know. I mean, there's great bookstores out there. Just
Yeah.
Everybody in America buy them. You know, just go buy books and read them.
Yeah. From your
wherever.
local mom and pop bookstore.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you so much, Ed. I really appreciate it. We'll do this again sometime soon. And
Hopefully,
yeah, everyone out there, we'll see you on Tuesday. So
Cool.
take care.
You guys have a great one.
You too, Ed.
Bye.